Welcome to the Bogosity Podcast for the 18th of March 2013, the podcast that takes escalators to a new level. Before we get to the news, I'd like to take a few minutes to talk to Jen Babka, president of DownsizeDC.org, about a recent experience he had with creationists at the co-op where he homeschools his children. Jen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Shane.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So, you homeschool your children at a Christian co-op? Tell us about that.
Well, we do homeschool, and it's common for parents who are homeschooling to get together for their kids to have social experiences and also maybe co-educational type of experiences. And the parents, since it's a co-op, every parent pitches in to help out, and two of my children are involved in such a co-op at the moment.
Okay, so there's no kind of authoritative structure. It's just kind of you all get together and...
Well, they have classes set up, and it's actually very organized. But each of the classes are led by a parent. There's actually a syllabus for the class and so forth, and they usually have work that they take home to do during the week and bring in later in the week. But the parent is still the primary educator, and most of their time is still spent being homeschooled. They get together one day a week.
Okay. And you are a Christian who accepts evolution and rejects creationism, but this co-op teaches young earth creationism?
That's correct.
Okay, and I know a lot of my listeners, they're kind of trepidatious about homeschooling for this reason. They don't like the idea of kids being taught all the misinformation about science that comes along with creationism. How big a deal do you think that is?
I think it's an opportunity, frankly. It's interesting because both of my kids instinctively, because we were taking them to the co-op when they were younger, did gravitate towards the ideas that they were learning from their peers and from the co-op. But as time went by and we began discussing these things, they found out what my position was and found out it differed. And this actually offered us an opportunity, Shane, to actually have some very interesting discussions. And as they've grown older and matured, those discussions have begun to expand. And have become, a little bit more in depth, where they're actually, the kind of questions that maybe more adults might not be getting answered. My boys are 8th graders, and so they came back with some really good questions. And one of my sons has his particular personality bent is probably very similar to mine. He has a need to express himself when he thinks something's right or wrong. He wants to stand up and say something. And so he has actually taken advantage of being the kid that comes into the room and says something that nobody else knows. So he kind of has almost treasured this opportunity to come in and share information that maybe the rest of his classmates would not necessarily have been exposed to.
That's good. And so you contacted me when your son was assigned a report on how Mount St. Helens supposedly proves that all the layers that we see and all the fossils in the layers could have been laid down by the flood. And so in response, I sent you a few links, and I'll put those in the show notes so people can check it out. Why don't you tell us what happened after that? Your son wrote a report on how the creationist claim is wrong?
Yes, he did. He wrote actually the way the assignment was structured, he was supposed to demonstrate how this showed exactly what you said, that Noah's flood could have led to coal formation. And so here we have this Mount St. Helens example, and there's actually a particular scientist that and I use the term loosely, who's behind that this notion. And so he began doing some research, and the links you sent us were very helpful. I'd started looking at the panda's thumb to see if I could find anything, but didn't find anything there initially, and that's when I reached out to you. And he took that information and he formed it into a report. He turned it in, and every one of the students was asked to get up in front of the class and share what they learned in their report. So he shared his report with the rest of the class. That alone was exciting enough for him that he had that opportunity. But what ended up being a plus was that the teacher in the room told the rest of the students that they all needed to take a cue from Steve, that's my son, because they needed to learn a thing for themselves. They needed to learn to begin to analyze and question and begin to figure out these answers for themselves. I think obviously there's a hope on her part as to where the kids would end up after having studied these questions, but she applauded. She didn't discourage Steve in any way. She applauded him, and then came back and told my wife later on that same day, because my wife is one of the parents that participates in helping out at the co-op, came back and said that she really appreciates having Steve in her class, and that, he always brings something interesting in, and she just likes the way he thinks. So we were very excited and pleased by that result.
That's great. See, I'm calling this a success story. It's easy to get discouraged when you're looking around and you don't really see any kind of major progress going on, but I don't think it's going to happen that something like this happens once and the other person says, "Oh, okay, you're right about that. I'm going to completely reverse everything I've believed for years and years."
Yes.
But I think he planted a seed that day, and whether or not it germinates just depends on what else happens. But if you have another opportunity to nudge them a little closer to the truth, and then someone else nudges them a little closer, I think it's that cumulative action over time that you're going for.
That's exactly right. And, my son is in this class for a period of time that basically resembles a school year. And so he's been doing little bits and pieces of this throughout the school year. This was kind of the first time that he had to be able to kind of take something head on where there was a specific claim and he got a chance to tackle it. But there's been other opportunities where he's been able to question things or point out things that people are overlooking and so forth. And I have another son who's in that very same class. He chose to write the paper in the way that just got the assignment done, but it wasn't lost on him what all was going on, and he usually has his brother's back in the course of a discussion. So it's interesting, they both have different personality types, but I'm having similar conversations in a lot of ways with both of them and with all three of my kids. I have an older daughter as well. And so, I actually look at this, Shane, these are actually opportunities for me as a parent. They're getting one set of information, they come back and find out that I disagree, and I'm able to step in then and be able to say, okay, well, here's what why I disagree. And I have that time because they are homeschooled. They're with me for the 5 days of the week. So, they go to this class on Fridays and some other classes, but they're here the rest of the week. And so we have plenty of time to interact with each other and plenty of time to talk about a lot of ideas and concepts, including these.
Yeah, and I guess indirectly you're also having an effect on the other kids there as well as they talk to your son about these things.
Yeah, and it's funny because early in the school year when Steve would speak up, and this is not the type of thing that would have stopped him, but there was one kid in the class in particular, but 2 or 3 others would kind of join in and explain why Steve was wrong, and they would be pretty forceful about it. Steve wasn't deterred by any of this, but after he gave this particular presentation where he had, footnotes and so forth to prove his point, and the teacher saying everybody should learn from Steve's, he's actually going out and testing and analyzing claims, none of them had anything else to say about it. And so, there may be a degree to which he's kind of winning their respect a little bit because he has kind of stepped through this. And, really, if you're going to come into a situation and take on an idea that is kind of a heresy, so to speak, and I don't mean that literally, but it's kind of like that, you got to be prepared for a little bit of pushback initially before people begin to get used to the idea and start to maybe engage you and realize, hey, I have to actually interact with his ideas. I can't just, bully him out of talking. I have to actually engage him in his ideas. And so I think he is actually making progress. And frankly, as a father, I'm proud.
As you should be. Jim Babka, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Shane.
Do you want answers to creationist claims against evolution? Would you like to know more about evolution yourself, or even engage creationists more directly, with actual peer-reviewed sources to back you up? My book, How Evolution is Scientific, is designed to show the basics of evolutionary theory and how it is so well supported using the scientific method. It's impeccably sourced, with references to the actual scientific material, and is arranged using the creationists' own criteria of what is scientific. Using their own arguments against them, see how evolution is scientific, but creationism is not, based on observations, accurate predictions, logic, and evidence. Get answers to common creationist claims, and even a primer on abiogenesis, the start of all life. It's all in my book, How Evolution is Scientific, available at Amazon and on Kindle, EPUB, and PDF as well. Get How Evolution is Scientific and never be taken in by creationists again. Now let's obliviate the news of the bogus. New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg's famous and much maligned ban of sales of large-sized sodas will not be implemented after a ruling by State Supreme Court Judge Milton Tingling that struck it down as overstepping the government's rightful and legal powers. Specifically, the judge found the law was arbitrary and capricious, since it covered some food establishments but not others, that it was beyond the Department of Health's powers, saying that their power to act absent the law was limited only to emergencies, and that it violated the separation of powers, since the law should have been passed by the New York City Council and not Bloomberg's own appointees in the Department of Health. The mayor's office and all his departments are supposed to execute the laws, not create them. The judge said the ban would, quote, not only violate the separation of powers doctrine, it would eviscerate it. Such an evisceration has the potential to be more troubling than sugar-sweetened beverages. Not surprisingly, Bloomberg is whining about the decision and still stands by his soda ban. Quote, "It would be irresponsible not to try to do everything we can to save lives." Really? Then why don't you go around crippling everybody's cars so they only travel at 5 miles an hour? How about a citywide curfew during lightning storms? A ban on swimming pools and bathtubs? Those would qualify under the category of everything. If you honestly believe you have the power to do everything that could conceivably save a life, then there is no limit to government power. Sorry, that's not how this country is supposed to operate. Of course, at a news conference, Bloomberg said he has no plans to bring the measure before the city council to get it passed properly. Seems his goal is seizing ultimate authority over the city, not playing by the rules to pass laws he believes are best for the people. He did say, quote, "Our Board of Health has always been a pioneer. It has always been ahead of the curve, and you would expect nothing less from this city." Yeah, it's been ahead of the curve in interfering with people's lives and trying to force the nanny state on them. That's not something to be proud of, Bloomy. Of course, there are other statists out there bemoaning the decision as well. One of them was Jennifer Pomeranz, Director of Legal Initiatives at Yale University's Rudd Center for Food Policy and Obesity, in comparing this to the earlier ban on trans fats. Quote, "The judge got it wrong. It doesn't make sense to me that the trans fat ban is legal and they struck this down." Hey, you know what? I agree it doesn't make sense, but it was the earlier court that erred. New York shouldn't be banning sugary drinks or trans fats. Leave people alone and let them make their own decisions regarding their own bodies. I wonder if Pomeranz is pro-choice. I mean, it's a woman's right to choose when it's a baby, but not a soda? That doesn't make sense to me. Another statist disappointed by this ruling that we're actually free people is Claire Wang, Assistant Professor of Health Policy and Management at Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health. Quote, "The city has been at the forefront of trying to push the envelope on what we can do for population health, and from that standpoint, it's very courageous. New York City has done a lot of things in public health that no one has done before, but everyone follows suit." You know what? That's a better reason to strike it down now, before this trend spreads like a statist anti-freedom virus. You know, I never understood why the slippery slope was considered a fallacy. After all this started with the smoking bans. And when people said this would lead to banning fast food, sodas, and so on, the statists replied, "Don't be so ridiculous, you wacky libertarians. This is just about smoking. Stop using the slippery slope fallacy." But the slippery slope seems to be about the only reliable thing about government. What happens if you're innocent of a crime but sent to prison anyway? What if you weren't even given a trial? And what if you're put in solitary confinement for over 2 years with a level of neglect that results in serious mental trauma, toenails growing to the point where they curl all the way around, and fungus growing on your skin from being denied showers? Sound like some sort of horror story from a third world country or fascist dictatorship? Think it can't happen here in the good old United States of America? Well, it did happen to Stephen Selvin when Donna Ana County, New Mexico arrested him for DWI and accused him of driving a stolen vehicle. Turns out it wasn't stolen at all. A friend had loaned him the car. Not only was Selvin never given a trial, he was never even taken before a judge. His right to habeas corpus was completely denied. 3 days later, he was put into solitary confinement with no explanation. In solitary, a prisoner is entitled to 1 hour a day outside his cell. Selvin never even got that much. He was neglected to the point where he had to pull his own tooth because he wasn't allowed to see a dentist. Now, after 22 months in solitary confinement, and 5 years after his ordeal was over, he was finally awarded compensation. In a settlement deal with Donna Ana County, Selvin is to be awarded $15.5 million in damages. They have also undertaken to make improvements to the facility. And the total number of jail personnel who have been fired because of this horrific treatment is 0. And apparently, the problem goes all the way up to the warden. According to Selvin's attorney, Matt Coit, quote, "If you were in the trial and heard what the person who ran the facility said, you would be appalled. I get lots of people calling from that jail asking for help. Am I pleased that they spent more money in the jail? Absolutely. I'm pleased that Mr. Selvin's case has made a difference in the jail. But the same people are running it, and it's an attitude of how you run something. Folks, you just can't worm out of this by saying it's an isolated incident. If it were, there would have been no hesitation to get Selvin justice and compensation, and heads would have rolled, even if the warden himself were responsible. It's not so much that it happened, it's that everyone involved completely got away with it with no personal accountability. Even the $15 million will be paid by the taxpayers, not personally by any of the perpetrators. This points to a serious problem with the system, where a man can be jailed, neglected, and undergo intense mental abuse without even so much as going to a judge, and not one person pays the price for it. That is the problem still ahead of us. Other prisoners are protesting as well, specifically prisoners being held by the United States at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba who are engaged in a hunger strike. According to New York lawyer Pardis Cabrai, quote, "My client and other men have reported that most of the detainees in Camp 6 are on strike, except for a small few who are elderly or sick." The protest is over the denial of basic personal items. According to the Center for Constitutional Rights, quote, "Since approximately February 6, 2013, camp authorities have been confiscating detainees' personal items, including blankets, sheets, towels, mats, razors, toothbrushes, books, family photos, religious CDs, and letters including legal mail, and restricting their exercise seemingly without provocation or cause." They also claimed that their Qurans were taken from them in a desecrating manner and that they were not allowed to pray as their religion requires. Apparently 5 of them are now being force-fed through tubes. Authorities denied that the Qurans were desecrated when they were taken. Wait, that's it? They're denied blankets, toothbrushes, and other personal items, and your only denial is that their Qurans were not desecrated? Why were they taken at all? And all this over 4 years after the man who promised to close the facility was elected president. If you want to know why terrorism is such a problem, if you want to know why so many people in other countries hate us and want to wage war on us, this is it. A microcosm of a hideously aggressive foreign policy which makes America look as much like terrorists as the Taliban. When will we learn? And now it's time to overturn the reputation of this week's biggest bogon emitter. This podcast has covered the Citizens United case before, when the Supreme Court took the radical notion that people actually have the right to pool their money to say bad things about federal incumbents. Of course, those in favor of the status quo never saw it that way, and have spread all sorts of misinformation about it in order to scare people into thinking the government's going to be run by Walmart. Well now, Senator Bernie Sanders has filed a constitutional amendment that would overturn Citizens United, as well as parts of Buckley v. Vallejo, called the Democracy is for the People Amendment. With a name like that, you know it can't be good. According to the text of the amendment, it would protect the integrity and fairness of the electoral process by establishing public financing for elections, as well as limit the amount of money corporations and even individuals can donate to a campaign or PAC, including the candidate himself. Moreover, the text of the amendment would exclude anyone who didn't have the right to vote. Not only could foreigners no longer donate, but people under the age of 18 and people who've had their right to vote taken from them by the courts or even arbitrary laws couldn't donate either. All of this is to try to get around the protections on our individual liberties that Citizens United represents. Well, let me go back to Jim Babka of Downsize DC, because Jim, you have a certain amount of expertise and experience with the Citizens United case, am I correct?
Yes, we actually took, first of all, Citizens United was a partner with us when we took a case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court back in 2002 and 2003, McConnell v. FEC, which was basically the fight back or the challenge against the McCain-Feingold law. Citizens United was actually one of our partners. Ron Paul was our lead plaintiff. Gun Owners of America joined us. At the time, my organization was called RealCampaignReform.org. And on the Citizens United case itself, we actually wrote an amicus brief first, suggesting that the wrong issues were being argued. We felt that the attorneys representing Citizens United were doing a pretty poor job, frankly. And we came back and said, listen, these are the issues that should be argued. And the Supreme Court basically agreed. They didn't cite our brief or anything, but they said, we want you to go back and rebrief this case and come back in a few months and represent your case. And so we got what we asked for, and so we came in with another brief at that point, and we got basically a landmark decision that has been causing a lot of statists to howl and shriek ever since.
So how do you respond to people who give the typical reaction to the Citizens United case? Oh, this is just going to let corporations take over elections and super PACs are going to run everything.
Well, there's a number of different ways we could go about this. First of all, we could talk about the First Amendment, and we could talk about corporations, such as the New York Times, which has is itself a corporation, but has what's called a press exemption. And we argue and have argued all the way back to the early 2000s that every person is a press. You, Shane Killian, are a press. I, Jim Babcock, are a press. But you and I don't have the kind of resources that they do at the New York Times, so we use another First Amendment right, which is the right to peaceably assemble, and we get together and we pool our resources so that we can publish our views. And we publish our views. One way we can do that is through political campaigns. So we pool our resources and we try to get our message out there, and that's extremely important. That's a good, solid constitutional argument based on free press. It's an argument that needs to be made, particularly in the courts. But I think another argument that is overlooked, and it's extremely important, is how campaigns themselves work. In my position as president of DownsizeDC.org, I have candidates call me. Every couple of years, they say, hey, I'm running for Congress, and I'm willing to endorse your bills and so forth, and I'm excited about this. I always ask them, Shane, how much money have you raised? And they usually don't answer the question because they aren't raising money, and they're not doing a very good job of it. And they'll say, well, you don't even understand. This is the common thing they'll tell me. I'm meeting people all over the district that are tired of Congressman X. They can't stand him. I mean, they're all over the place. And the way they talk, they make it sound like they're practically winning in the polls already, right? They're going to sneak up on the incumbent and knock him out. It's not even going to cost a dime to do it. Well, I know they're already going to lose, and here's why. Incumbents have basically done everything they can to win their election. They are at the top of their game. They have a war chest. He's got all these incumbent powers that come with him. So they give money to the politicians. The challenger, on the other hand, has no power, very little chance to win. And because contributions have to be publicly reported, not a lot of people want their names to show up on those reports if they want to keep access to the incumbent congressman. Money matters more to challengers because that's how the challenger begins to equalize the game. That's how they get their message out. That's how they make the people familiar with them. That's how they call the incumbent's record into question. Money matters more to challengers, infinitely more. So here's the game, Shane. This is what everyone needs to know if they want to run for public office. I'm going to give them the most important thing they need to know if they want to defeat a sitting congressman. The game is to get the incumbent congressman to start spending that money from his war chest. And the way that you do that is you raise enough money and spend enough of it that you force him to have to begin to defend his position. Remember, he can only go down. And the more you force the incumbent to spend, the closer and closer the race will get. In fact, there's a very funny example. Tom Foley was the sitting Speaker of the House of Representatives in the mid-1990s. A guy named George Nethercutt was running against him. Foley had infinite amounts of money. I don't even remember how much it was anymore, but it was a lot. George Nethercutt only had a couple $100,000. By the time the campaign was over, when they saw what was happening up there, he was able to get $400,000 directed his direction, which was nowhere near what Tom Foley spent. Every time Tom Foley ran an ad, he lost ground. He'd take the ads off the air, he'd stop losing ground, but he wasn't gaining any, and Nethercutt was gaining on him. So he'd run more ads, and he would go down again. And eventually, on election day, George Nethercutt beat a sitting Speaker of the House because he was able to force the incumbent to begin spending his money. The money matters to challengers. These contribution limits, reporting requirements, all of these other things that are put in place, these are laws written by incumbents designed to keep challengers from being able to raise their funds and compete. These are Incumbent Protection Acts, pure and simple. If you want to change the dynamic in Washington, if you believe that we need a shakeup there, then the most important thing that we could possibly do is free the challengers from those campaign finance laws. When people say, well, that wouldn't be fair to the incumbents, you're right, it wouldn't. That's why we go back to the First Amendment. We follow James Madison's advice. He said there's always going to be faction. The cure for faction is more faction. In other words, more voices in the political arena, more people getting their message out. Let the voters take in all the information that both sides are going to churn out with all that money and let them use it. to make the best decision they can. That really is the best, most dynamic answer we could ask for.
So when Bernie Sanders talks about, and this is a direct quote, the corrupting influence of private wealth in public elections, do you know what he's talking about there?
I have very little understanding of what he's talking about. First of all, corruption has a meaning, and generally it has something to do with like bribery or something. So if it's bribery, we already have laws against that. But the bigger question I would ask Bernie Sanders is, how can you possibly bribe the loser? I mean, if I spend $1 million trying to help a guy get elected and he loses, what good did it do me?
And something I think that's been very innovative about the way Downsize DC has done this is focusing on this aspect of freedom of the press, which is interesting because Section 3 of his proposed amendment is, and this is, again, direct quote, "Nothing in this article shall be construed to alter the freedom of the press." But doesn't it all alter the freedom of the press?
It does alter the freedom of the press because, again, understand that you are a press, I'm a press, everyone listening is a press. These are individual rights that have been granted to every one of us. It's interesting that they're concerned about corporate influence, but they're not concerned about NBC and ABC. They're not concerned about the New York Times and the Washington Post or your local paper having this. And in this modern day and age, where you have a radio show right now that we're doing via podcast, where other people have blogs, other people have, informational websites. Who's to say what a press is anymore? And the notion that somehow or other, they're going to be able to exempt one class clearly shows their favoritism. So what they're going to do is they're going to keep the one entity that really can help them as incumbents, because they will cover incumbents, tend to cover them more and better, and they're going to put rules in place to continue to make it harder for challengers. And really, this is again, for the reasons we've already covered, such a terrible idea. It won't work. And this is why, since we instituted campaign finance limits, incumbency in the Congress has increased to record levels. There's only been a couple elections where this is an exception, but it's usually running about 98% of those who seek re-election get their seats back.
And something else, I think, this goes by what you were saying at the start, but it deserves to be emphasized. His contention that these rights to influence the outcomes of public elections, again, this is a direct quote, belong only to natural persons. So I'm wondering what other kind of persons there are other than natural persons that make up these corporations. Are they androids, Martians, super intelligent shades of the color blue?
The thing is, corporations do have interests, and every single individual who is somehow are connected to the corporation understands this. If you're in a particular industry, and Congress is about to regulate in a certain way that's going to hurt your industry, and you're going to lose your job as a result, well, all of a sudden you want your corporation to be able to speak up for you, don't you? If you give to a nonprofit organization, most of those are incorporated. Downsize DC happens to be incorporated. The NRA is incorporated. AARP is incorporated. These organizations speak for various blocks of people out there. They are doing that association that I talked about, that pooling of resources that I spoke of. They have people who, this is what they do all day. They follow these certain issues and they keep up on them, because you can't possibly do that. You're actually working all the time, and other people can't do that. You're working all the time. And so we turn to these other organizations to help us. I'm very passionate about the issue of gun rights. I rely on Gun Owners of America. I'm very passionate about certain health issues. I rely on Life Extension Foundation. I have favorite organizations that I turn to, and everyone in this audience does as well. And we give a little bit of our resources, a tiny portion, to help that enterprise go. And then we pay attention to the information they churn out. They have the experts and the ability to keep us informed of what's going on. They're able to help direct force when it's necessary back to the Capitol to let them know what's going on, and make sure that our testimony is included, that our voice is heard, and maybe that a bad bill will be defeated. So the idea that somehow the corporations are evil, corporations are really made up of real flesh and blood people.
So sum it up for me. Why should people be in favor of the Citizens United case and against this amendment? Well,
listen, Citizens United is not a perfect solution. It's really kind of a bastard child, but it's a nice child. It's one that we're glad to have. It's a step in the right direction, because what it does is it says that there is a way for people to go out and express themselves in the political process where they're not subject to reporting requirements and limits. They're able to exercise their true First Amendment rights. And those rights, I believe, and I'm pretty sure you share this opinion, Shane, are pre-constitutional. These rights existed naturally before someone wrote them down in the Constitution. I don't get them from the government. I don't get them from the Constitution. They came to me with my person. They come to you with your person. And so we want those rights. We want to be able to express ourselves. We earn the money that we earn. We have values and opinions, and we want to be able to express those opinions. We need to be able to do that. We need to be able to associate in order to get that done. But I come back, for me, this all gets very personal. In 2000, I was the press secretary for a candidate by the name of Harry Browne. He was running for president of the United States. He was on the Libertarian Party ticket. And he was a fantastic spokesman for my values. I couldn't have found a better spokesman for my values. And I wanted to see him on the debate stage. This is all I wanted. I wanted him on the debate stage with Al Gore and George W. Bush, because I believe history would have been changed if he'd have been there. I think he'd have mopped the floor with those two guys, quite frankly. And I wanted to see him get that opportunity. And here's the sad part. Because of Harry's previous career, he knew a lot of people who were capable of giving 6 and even 7-figure checks that would have helped put the campaign together. Now, we ended up running a campaign that was about $2 million in size by the time it was said and done, which is a pittance compared to what the major parties spent. But we could have had a 10, 12, maybe even $20 million campaign with the help of these other people. These other people didn't give anything at all because at the time the contributions were limited to $1,000, and they knew their $1,000 wasn't going to make a hill of difference. And they knew there wasn't enough of them that their $1,000 was going to make a bit of difference. And so they simply sat out. They didn't want their name showing up on an FEC report. But if they could have come in and given large sums of money, we could have at least got him on that debate stage. I firmly believe that the campaign finance laws stop that. Citizens United doesn't make that possible. Citizens United gives a backdoor way that without coordinating with a campaign, a group of people come in and run their own ads. They don't allow you to support the candidate directly, but they do allow you to kind of maybe attack his opponents or kind of give some support to him and help elevate him. And it's because of this that also rans like Newt Gingrich, Rick Santorum, Ron Paul, all were able to mount enough of an effort. They were able to bring some of this independent money to come in through the back door, so to speak, that allowed them to compete and make it harder for Mitt Romney to make a straight beeline to the nomination because the party was doing everything it could to make sure there was as little competition as possible. So if you believe that the major parties are doing such a fantastic job representing you, why you don't even think you should have a choice. You just want to trust those guys at the Democratic National Headquarters and the Republican National Headquarters to make your decision, why by all means support campaign finance reform, fight Citizens United tooth and nail. But if you have a problem with how they're doing it, if you believe you want to secure that right to yourself, you want more choices available to you, you want to challenge the status quo, you think there's too much incumbency, then we really need Citizens United, but we need to do better. We need to make it possible so that anyone can give to any candidate they wish, at any amount they wish, and as privately as they do when they go and cast their secret ballot in the booth, and for exactly the same reasons.
Jim Babka, thanks again.
Thank you, Shane.
So after all that, I think we can all agree that Bernie Sanders just has to be this week's biggest bogon emitter. And now it's time to stick playing cards into the spokes of this week's Idiot Extraordinaire! Senate Democrats in Washington state have produced a $10 billion transportation package, which includes lots of things that supposedly help the environment, but really just get more money for the government, such as an increase in taxes for gasoline and motor vehicles. And included in this is something advocated by Washington State Representative Ed Orcutt. Are you ready for this? It's a $25 tax on bicycles. Yes, anyone with a bicycle costing more than $500 will be forced to pay the government an additional $25. According to Orcutt, quote, "Sorry, but I do think that bicyclists need to start paying for the roads they ride on rather than make motorists pay. When you are riding your bicycle, tell me what taxes are being generated by the act of riding your bicycle." Okay, I'll tell you. And this is straight from the 2009 annual report of the Seattle Department of Transportation. Gas taxes only generate 4% of the department's revenues. 12% is paid out of the general fund and 18% from property taxes. So what's next? A tax on people who don't own a house? But that isn't his biggest fail. Note that this is an environmental bill. But I thought bicycles were good for the environment. Not according to Orcutt. Quote, A cyclist has an increased heart rate and respiration. That means that the act of riding a bike results in greater emissions of carbon dioxide from the rider. Since CO2 is deemed to be a greenhouse gas and a pollutant, bicyclists are actually polluting when they ride. Yep, it's finally happened, a tax on breathing. Okay, what he says is technically true. We breathe in oxygen and exhale CO2. With bicycling, this process increases and we exhale even more CO2. But this is also true of any form of exercise. So Orkut, are you also going to tax people riding on the exercise bike at the gym? They're generating just as much CO2. And this isn't even CO2 that contributes to global warming. Using gasoline is a problem because by burning gasoline, we're taking carbon that was sequestered underground by plants over the course of millions of years and putting it back into the atmosphere over the course of hundreds of years. But the CO2 you exhale is merely a replacement from when some plant somewhere took out the CO2 and generated the O2 you inhaled to begin with. The plant takes the carbon out of the atmosphere and you put it back in. Not at all the same thing. Orkut later attempted to apologize for his comments. Quote, "My point was that by not driving a car, a cyclist was not necessarily having a zero carbon footprint. In looking back, it was not a point worthy of mentioning, so again, I apologize." Notice that he didn't actually say he was wrong about the zero carbon footprint, and he still said, quote, "The one aspect of the Democrat tax plan that has merit is their proposed $25 tax on the purchase of any bicycle $500 or more. The idea of bicyclists paying for some of the infrastructure they are using is one which merits consideration." Except, as I've already pointed out, it doesn't. Gas taxes only cover about 4% of the cost of maintaining the roads. And I'm sure cars cause roads to require a lot more maintenance, even if you do figure in the cost of things like bicycle lanes. When you make a comment that stupid and can't even get it right by apologizing, it just means that you're the only one who could possibly qualify as this week's Idiot Extraordinaire! Well, that wraps up this Ultimate Driving Machine edition of the Bogosity Podcast. Please visit the forums at bogosity.tv where you can read the show notes and join the discussion on these and other subjects. This podcast is free, but not free to produce, so please use the donate button at the top of the Bogosity.tv website or down the right-hand side of the podcast page and give generously to keep this podcast going. And if you want to donate Bitcoins, you can use the Bitcoin address in the header at Bogosity.tv. And if you'd like to contribute to the podcast, just send a question, statement, news article, or rant to podcast@Bogosity.tv. Put it in an audio file, and if it's good enough, it'll get played right in the podcast. Thanks to Jim Babka of Downsize DC for joining me, and thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Michael Cloud. "But can you print fire in a crowded theater?" The Bogosity Podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 3.0 Imported License. Bogosity. History is written by the winners, and so apparently is economics. That's why there's Liberty Classroom. Probably the best single learning resource for history and economics on the web, Liberty Classroom teaches U.S. history, Western Civ, and economics from actual university professors. There's lots of free material to get you started, including introductory lectures on all these subjects. And when you sign up, you'll get the full site's content for just $99 a year. You can watch or listen to the lectures whenever and wherever you want, even in your car. Learn at your own pace about the subjects you're interested in and become a more effective debater. You'll also get access to the professors via the discussion forum and even live video chats, all for the price of 2 cups of coffee a month. Use our special URL, libertyclassroom.bogosity.tv, and when you sign up, you'll be helping this podcast too. So bookmark libertyclassroom.bogosity.tv and use it when you sign up. Inform yourself against the myths and propaganda of our society. Visit libertyclassroom.bogosity.tv.